This is Peter Mack for the Huffington Post. We're getting ready to do a little bit of what I like to call Mac and Chat. And I am talking to Lara Parker, who starred in the cult ABC classic soap opera, gothic soap opera, Dark Shadows from 1966 to 1971. Lara also starred in the 1971 MGM feature film, Night of Dark Shadows, along with David Selby and Kate Jackson. And since then, she has gone on to write 4 Dark Shadows novels, continuing the story picking it up where it left off, and has just published Dark Shadows, Heiress of Collinwood. That's number 4 in the series. So I really appreciate this, Lara. Thanks for chatting with me.
How you doing? I'm glad to be here.
So, this past June, it marked 50 years, the 50th anniversary of Dark Shadows. Does it still amaze you, the long-lasting popularity, the fact that it's gotten to its 50th anniversary and the interest doesn't seem to be waning?
It doesn't amaze me anymore. I think at about, after we've been off the air about 20 years, I was amazed. But the interesting thing is, as the years have gone by, there has never been a show like it. And I think the unique qualities that this particular little soap opera possessed, they seem to become more important or more interesting or more valuable as the years go by. And I laugh and I say, sometimes in the conventions when they play a scene, we used to just cringe and go, "Oh God, we're so terrible." But every time we see a scene, we seem to get better. Now, of course, this is impossible because it's the same scene. But the truth is that as society gets kind of less interesting, Dark Shadows gets more interesting. And I think it did things, and it made a contribution to the culture that was just like nothing else. And there have been so many vampires.
Yes.
They're everywhere. Yes. And there are monsters, and there are zombies, and there are creatures from the Black Lagoon, and there are just these horror characters, and they seem to be so popular, and everybody loves them so much. But, Dark Shadows was not horror, and it was gothic romance, and our vampire wasn't, he wasn't a blood and guts kind of drooling monster. He had a soul, and he was human in so many ways, and he was
self-loathing almost. I mean, and reluctant
for him, yeah. And all the characters, many, I played a witch. Well, we don't what witches are like. They're mean and evil, and they do horrible things to people, and they cackle and they make terrible faces. And
everyone thinks of Margaret Hamilton and the Wicked Witch of the West. That's kind of the classic.
It's like one level,
Yes.
It's the witch level, and we could only expect horrible things from her. And I didn't. My witch was not like that at all. She was someone whose heart had been broken, who loved so deeply that she would do anything to get this man back. And I mean anything.
She did.
But it was all because she loved him so much, and she could not bear to have him discard her when he had seduced her and made her believe that he was going to marry her, and so it's I think the layer, and I just the fact that Dark Shadows used the classics, starting with Jane Eyre and then continuing through all the great romance novels, and there was just the writing was wonderful, the conflicts were wonderful, the acting was way over the top, acting that you certainly didn't see it in any other soap operas kinds of acting we were doing. And, it came out camp, but we didn't play it camp. We played it totally with total conviction. And I just really think that it's one of a kind. And I think that the people who fell in love with Dark Shadows, most of them when they were in their adolescence or pre-adolescence,
Sure.
They found a kind of escapism that was empowering. And that's a little bit difficult to understand. But there was just something about being able to come home from school. Maybe they'd been lonely, maybe they'd been bullied, maybe they had pimples, maybe they were felt unpopular. Sit down and watch this marvelous escape and be able to identify with these characters. It was just a way out of their unhappiness and their loneliness. We've been told this so many times. I'm not making this up. I mean, I've had people say to me, into festivals, they come down the line, you got me through my adolescence.
Yeah.
Because you were strong. And because you could do things to you could do things to people when they were mean to you.
Exactly. I wanted to be Angelique. I mean, I thought, how great, just to have one of those little dolls and stick it to all the kids that were giving me a hard time. I totally related to that.
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it?
It totally would. Even today as an adult, it would be great.
Sometimes when I'm on the Canyon Road and then someone gets behind me and, they have a sports car and they want to go really, really fast around the curves and they honk. And I pull over and let them by. And then I say, I hope you die. I hope you die. And I hope you go off the road. And I hope your death is long and agonizing and you burn to death. Because you were such a, cast a spell.
The ire that you muster up the ire of Angelique.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's great. I needed that laugh.
I'm surprised because I think the people who still, who have to cough all those episodes in the coffin.
Like yours truly.
Yeah, and they, I don't know how many people have told me, I've started at the very beginning and watched it all the way through, and I'm starting again. I personally cannot watch it. I just find it tedious, and I mean, in writing the book, sometimes I have to make myself watch a whole section of it so that I can kind of retell that story.
Yes.
And it's just it's so slow, and I don't know, but I can see that a lot of people really, it's a wonderful escape. They love to escape into that world.
Well, those sets and that music, I mean, the wonderful Robert Cobert music and Cy Tomasoff sets, everything really, I think it was Jonathan Frid who once said, everything usually just coalesced into this just wonderful world that people were not, certainly, there was nothing like it on television at the time. I mean, who else was doing that?
And there never has been.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of vampires, but they're not, you don't love them.
No.
You don't care about them.
No, he was lovable. He was well, but so were you. And it's funny, with Angelique and even with Quentin, that they kind of then started to, I think, follow a mold with their monsters, and that they all were sympathetic. I mean, we started to see why she was a woman scorned and she had been used. So there was a reason as to why you were doing what you were doing as the character. And then the same thing with Quentin having, being cursed as a werewolf. But they all kind of had a reluctancy about them, and you had to feel sorry for them.
And, the writers were they were stumped, because when a character became incredibly popular, they turned the character into a hero.
Yeah.
So, Barnabas started saving people and caring for people and solving their problems. And a lot of times he would come to Angelique and say, can you help me with this problem? And she'd say, well, if you come back to me and you marry me and you love me, I'll help you.
Yes. And he'd always go back on his word.
It was always a little bit difficult to play because, she was supposed to be the villain. And sometimes I'd be put in a situation where I had to help people out. But that's because the writers were stumped. The character was so popular that they had to, give the character some positive aspects, is what I'm saying.
There's a scene I was watching recently. It's on one of the compilations, The Best of Barnabas, and it's when Barnabas realizes that you're on the scene again, and you have this wonderful confrontation in the tower room. I think Sam Hall wrote the episode. It's one of the best written scenes. He looks at you and says, I hate to be ungallant, but looking at you, all I can see is the madness and misery you've caused. And you look at him and say, and what do you see when you look in the mirror? Nothing, so you're spared your conscience. And it's just the two of you just act the crap out of it. It's a wonderful scene.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, in writing these books, I've thought an awful lot about these two characters and what makes them tick. And I think the Barnabas character is really fascinating because he's not really the Byronic hero. He is on the surface, and he's supposed to have that appeal, the brooding, melancholy, cynical, gorgeous man who's, a little older and, has never loved. So, the young, innocent girl comes to him and falls in love with him. But Barnabas was also, he had severe flaws. He had very strong faults. And he could never admit that he was wrong, and he could never admit that he made a mistake, and he could never learn from his mistakes.
He's a typical man.
Well, that does make him more human.
Yes.
And he was so lacking in the capacity to see the whole picture. And I just think that's I think that's important because I think really riveting characters have flaws.
Absolutely.
Scarlett O'Hara, you go, oh, for heaven's sakes, just shut up and marry him.
Exactly.
That loves you. But they never do, and so it's you're always pushing on that character to rise above their flaws, and when they don't, you become more attached to them. And so Dark Shadows had all of that. Yeah, it did have wonderful music.
Now, in terms of the books, with the starting of the books, did you approach them or did they approach you? Did you basically say, I've got this great idea and I'd like to get the green light for it, or was it? I was wondering just.
There was an editor at HarperCollins who got the idea, and I don't know where she got it from, but I had a meeting with her, and she said, and I think she envisioned a lot more than 4. I think she envisioned a whole slew of Dark Shadows novels. But she said, I don't know, I had been taking screenwriting classes, so I'd been studying screenwriting. And she said, we'd like to do some books, and would you like to write some of them? And I said, I've told this story a million times. I have no idea how to write a novel. I could never write a novel. And she said, well, you just kind of do the best you can because we'd like to put your name on it, like William Shatner writes.
Of course.
Of course, he doesn't write a word of it. Somebody else writes it, but they put his name on it.
They put his name on it, yes.
Yeah. And she said, and, we'll get a real writer to write it. And I said, wait a minute. You want me to write a novel and then watch while somebody rewrites it? I just thought that was the worst idea in the world.
Well, it's unbelievable.
I mean, I hadn't written a word, and I already felt like, why would they take my stories away from me? So I don't know. It was really very interesting. I mean, I discovered to my own surprise, I was really surprised that I have a kind of knack for it. And I think the fact that I've been writing screenplays helped a lot because I had learned a lot about structure.
Sure.
And I knew, what rising action was and what climaxes were and how characters evolved. And I'd already learned all that. And so I just started reading novels. And, of course, I started with Dickens, and I thought, I certainly can't do this. And I read a lot of, let's do a little Dostoevsky and I think I finally read a Daphne du Maurier novel, and I said, this doesn't seem so hard. Maybe I'd do something like this. And what I mean by something like this, I mean the dialogue, the character's description,
yes,
setting, what they call the mise en scène, with the scene, the whole dramatizing of the moment, the arc of the scene. All of these things I'd started to think about in writing screenplays. And then, of course, a novel is completely different because it's longer. It's really long.
Yes.
And it takes a long time.
What a wonderful inspiration, though. I mean, Rebecca, which obviously was something that certainly inspired Dark Shadows at least twice. So, I mean, the fact that you got the inclination from that, that's... It's hard to explain, but it's kind of like, when you're just learning, maybe you've taken ballet, but you've never taken tap. And yes.
Then you think, my God, I could never do that. I could never do that. That looks really hard. And then someone shows you a little step and you go, it's like from Chorus Line,
Exactly.
That? I could do that.
I could do that. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what it was. I thought, okay, I see, you start with the setting and you start with the time and you introduce your characters. And I think the thing that I caught on to, the very first thing I thought about was, I'm going to see it, because this is what I was doing in writing screenplays. I'm going to see it in my mind, and I'm going to describe what I see. And that's really what I do when I write.
That's wonderful.
So I think my writing has a certain kind of flow, or it has a clarity, even with all the description, because I am just specifically describing a scene that I see in my mind.
Absolutely.
And it's playing out in my mind, and then I describe it. And I also do cards. I do the cards, and I do about maybe 100, 120 cards on a big cork board.
Oh, wow.
And I spell out the entire, each act, and, screenplay structure with the hook and the first act ending and the midpoint and the climax and the rising, what they call the chase, and, all those aspects of, just the very ordinary screenplay.
Well, and certainly being a performer and being an actor, you certainly understand dialogue, and which is...
Well, that's another thing. I had to say so many things that were so badly written as an actress, doing TV, that I just, how am I ever going to say this line? I had this line on $6 Million Man, where was his name Steve? What was his name?
Steve, oh God, I didn't watch the show. Not Steve.
We'll say it was Steve.
We'll say it was Steve. I would say not Steve McQueen. Steve Austin.
Yeah. And the line was, I've always kept a candle burning in the window for you, Steve. Well, I defy you to say that line. You just can't say it. I mean, it's just one of those things that is so corny and so awful. Plus, the rhythm of it is wrong. You can't. It doesn't flow. And I just, I said, if nothing else, my characters are going to say things that an actor or an actress could say.
Yeah.
And, but I don't know, dialogue is one of the harder tricks, because the real test of dialogue is that nothing you say is about what you're thinking. And that's really hard to do. It's hard to write dialogue that isn't about what the scene's about. But good dialogue, just as in real life, when you're in a strongly emotional moment with someone, you are not saying what you're thinking. You're saying something else.
Yeah.
And once you recognize that, and as an actor, what you're playing, you're not playing the lines. You're playing what's under the lines. You're playing the emotional action. You're not playing the lines. So there you come back around to the circle again. So you have to write lines that the actor would not play, because the emotion lies under the lines. And it's a hard trick to pull off. And people who write really good dialogue, it's just wonderful, because you know exactly what they're thinking, but they don't say it. It's called not being on the nose.
Not being on the nose.
Yes, too on the nose. Too on the nose. I mean, you don't... I suppose characters do break down and say, I love you. And, if they have to. But for the most part, Dark Shadows was very on the nose. The characters all kind of said what they were saying. So I was always trying to pull away from that. But it's hard to do.
Well, you had now, so we started with Angelique's descent, which finally kind of gave the backstory of
my character. It told her childhood, which I completely made up, every single aspect of it. And, it was interesting. It's so interesting where you get ideas from. There's this place in Nepal, Kathmandu, where they have this little girl up in the window of this house, and she's the living goddess. They choose her by putting a lot of little girls in a room with a wild boar and wild dogs, and the one that doesn't cry will be chosen as the living goddess. And she has to sit in this room, and they cover her with makeup and jewelry, and they feed her. She gets very fat, and then she's worshipped. People walk by and they worship her, and they leave offerings. And she's very bored. And when she reaches adolescence, she's retired, and they pick a new one. And if anybody could Google the living goddess in Nepal and read about this little girl.
Yeah.
And see pictures of them. So when I was in Nepal, I saw one, and she was up there, and she had white makeup on her face, and she had this sour look on her face, and she was covered with jewelry, and she looked perfectly miserable.
Oh, gosh.
And I said, they said, that's our living goddess. So, I took that idea and just put it in Martinique. I mean, and they don't have living goddesses in Martinique, and they don't have wild dogs, and they don't have buffalo, or they don't have any of those things. But the idea
yes,
was a marvelous idea for the fact that the slaves had to be kept. It's just amazing where these ideas come from. And then the fact that, when she reached adolescence, they didn't retire her, but they cooked her and ate her. I don't know. That's great. I thought that was great. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I thought it was great.
Well, the first book certainly did well. And again, for Dark Shadows fans, it was great. We're getting new stories.
Well, everybody loved actually seeing the romance, because when Angelique was introduced, the romance was over. So being able to see his seduction of her and how smitten he became.
Yes.
And how he seduced her, and how he promised to marry her, and how he turned her head and convinced her that even though she was only a servant, he loved her. And I loved writing all of that because I thought that really gave her the motivation that she needed. And
now, when you were doing the show, when you were cast, first of all, I've got to ask this question because this is urban legend. Were you, in fact, submitted to play Victoria Winters?
I don't think so.
Okay, because that's
maybe.
when.
I mean, maybe Dan was seeing a group of young actresses that he could, use in various ways. I remember being asked if I had ever done any period drama.
Because it was, it's
a little bit different from playing modern. And I had done a lot. I'd done a lot of period drama and summer stock and in university theater, and I said yes, and so I went in, and everybody knows the story as a fact. When I did the reading with Jonathan Frid, I was crying, and I would say, "Please don't leave me, I love you so much." And he said, "She's a witch." I said, "No, a witch?" He said, "Yeah, she's a witch." So I turned to the camera and gave it that, "He's going to be really, really sorry." Hell wants to know fury like a woman scorned. And I just did this thing with my eyes, and it was very hokey, but it got me the part.
But those eyes, and, those eyes.
If he hadn't said that, I would never have done that,
You were also, you were up against...
I loved writing that part, and I think that's what... And then the whole last third of the book is right from the show.
Yes.
It just happens to be from Angelique's point of view.
But it does kind of recap the whole 1795.
Recaps the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know where to stop. And my agent said, you're at over 500 pages, and they're not going to publish a book this long? I said, really? And she said, just stop. Just stop anywhere. That's what I did. So, it's always so interesting to see what really goes on, isn't it?
You were, now, when did you have any kind of, at the time when you were cast, I was watching an interview with, Catherine McGregor, who played Mrs. Olsen on Little House on the Prairie. And she said, when they cast me, I read all the books, but I suppose there wasn't too much backstory for Mrs. Olsen. So she said, I sat down and I wrote a 2 or 3 page essay just for myself, just so I would know where this woman came from, and I gave her own. So in terms of when you were cast on the show, did you think of any of that? Just thought, okay, it's a job, and I'm playing what they've written, and I'm not going to worry too much about the backstory at that point in 1967.
Well, you're also an actor, and a job is a job.
Yeah.
And this job, where we had to do a half-hour show every single day with 3 to 4 rehearsals, there wasn't a lot of indulgence. You didn't sit around and say, I think I'm going to write a few pages about her past. We had so much to do, so much to think about in order to even remember where our marks were or what our lines were. But I think that actors are trained to do this sort of thing sort of unconsciously or instinctively. You create what you do when you act is you create an interior monologue or dialogue with yourself.
Yes.
Where there's a lot going on in your mind. As I said, underneath these lines you have to say. So, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it must have been like to have had that physical romance, to have to have loved this man and have him dump me for my mistress, who happened to be Catherine Lee Scott, not seem to be fair at all. So, it's just, I think and then when you're doing a soap, you just play the character so many times that you slowly develop all kinds of backstory. And but what that actress did is what actors are trained to do. I mean, this is in An Actor Prepares, Stanislavski. He
yes.
says, you should write an entire, you should write the story of your character, as deeply and as completely as you can. Everything about them, what they wear, what they eat, how they walk, their internal rhythms, what turns them on, what turns them off. You should know all of these things about your character. And I used to think, oh my God, that's so much work. Can I just say the lines? But it is part of what's considered preparation for building a character. And it's a good thing to do, I think.
There's a wonderful, you and Jonathan had a wonderful chemistry together. It was so believable, and
you think so?
I do. I do. I think he had a pretty good chemistry with most of the leading ladies on the show. Catherine Lee Scott, and you as well, and Grayson. Although I've always gotten the impression that I think Jonathan might have tolerated Grayson a little bit. But and a little birdie once told me this, that not to make you blush or anything, that he said you were a really good kisser.
Me?
Yes. I was told this by...
I think he was just saying that.
He was just saying that, yes.
No, he was a very dear man. Very kind. Generous. He had a hard time. Soap is hard to do. And he had a hard time learning, remembering his lines. He would go up in the middle of a scene, and you could see it in his eyes that he was stricken with terror.
Yeah.
Of course, it always looked like Barnabas was stricken with terror, so
it worked for the character.
Worked for the character, but he was so he was just very dear. He was never, he was snobby in that theatrical way, like Grayson was, but never cruel, never unkind, never critical, never difficult. And so doing scenes with him was, that the generosity of his personality was at work. So you looked into those eyes and you saw this actor struggling with his lines, and then our fights. You get comfortable with actors you do a lot of scenes with. I was very comfortable with him. I was very comfortable with Humbert.
Another actor that just the chemistry between the two of you, it was such a perfect match.
And we were good friends, and we used to, he was an acting teacher, and he used to he used to give me acting lessons. And he would, he'd talk to me about, the things that actors do, and when I was in the plays, and, he came to rehearsals, and he'd help me with the characterization. He was very generous as well. But, when you play a lot of scenes with someone, you get to know what it's going to be like, what the scene is going to be like, and that's the great thing about doing a soap, is you get very comfortable with everyone.
I just went by the studio because I was in New York. I was visiting my family, and I was heartbroken when I heard that it is rather scheduled to be bulldozed. It's terrible. You feel like, it's like when I saw the Johnny Depp movie and I saw Collinwood on fire, I was, bawling.
Oh, really?
They can't.
That was the reason you were bawling?
Well, there were, it wasn't right. That's a question I was going to.
It was a miniature.
It was a mini. Well, it was all CGI. It was all CGI, but it was. I think that was probably the two greatest things in that movie was that at least the outside of Collinwood looked like Collinwood, and then when you all came walking through the front door, and my husband and I cheered, people were looking at us like, "Why are they cheering?"
Who are you? Well, it was a big disappointment.
But I liked the
cried
prologue
when it was over because I'd expected so much more.
We all did. I mean, I'm kind of happy that it happened on the one hand, but it was a missed opportunity, and I love the prologue. I thought if they had just kept the tone of the movie with the way the first, I guess, 10 or 11 minutes were, and where they were describing how Barnabas scorned Angelique. And,
if they only had a story, just a story.
Yeah.
I mean, Dark Shadows was built on stories. There was no suspense. It was very silly. It was very silly. Canneries? Come on.
Yeah.
Plus, our Barnabas would never have hung from a chandelier. I mean, he was way above that. They missed an opportunity to do 10 more movies is what they missed.
Exactly.
It could have been a wonderful franchise, and it could have gone on and on and on, and all of my books would have sold a lot more copies. No.
You're being honest, and it's true.
Yeah, and they didn't want to talk to anybody who knew anything. I mean, Dark Shadows has a special tone, and they were not even interested in recreating that tone. They made fun of it, and the fans hated it for that reason.
Yeah.
Didn't hate it. I mean, I think Johnny Depp I think he drops a one-liner as good as anyone in the world. He can drop that, what is it, Alice Cooper, the ugliest woman I've ever seen, whatever the line
Yes,
was.
exactly.
He drop those lines, and he brings them off. He's got pizzazz. He's got a lot of charm. He's wonderful looking. But he's impish, and,
Well, the movie also didn't have the innocence that the original series had. There was a wonderful innocence about Dark Shadows and a naivete that just, it wasn't part of the film. You just didn't get that. And
I think Ava Green is delicious and gorgeous and wonderful, but you see, that's not Angelique. Angelique was vulnerable.
Exactly.
And that's what made her interesting. Someone who is just hateful, no matter how beautiful they are, is not really very interesting.
We didn't see any vulnerability from her until I guess it was the last 5 minutes of the movie. When she cracked.
Her face all up. Yeah, it was really a missed opportunity because there were so many stories they could have told. And I still feel that someone could come along and do it again and do it right.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think that there is in all likelihood that we could have either a major motion picture or better yet a series that it could come back?
I do. I really do. I mean, you look at something like Buffy. It was a wonderful character, and so was the vampire. I mean, they gave them, and I just think Dark Shadows could go forever. I think it could go forever. If they redid it, they'd have to do it with a little bit more cultural awareness. But maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they could stay in the old house and not have telephones. I don't know.
Well, I kind of like that. See, for me, that's what I think. Again, if people are too slick, and in this day and age of computers and that, when the NBC series was done, I was crushed. That I'm like, well, why aren't they setting it in the 60s? And then after the success of Mad Men, I thought, yes, this is a perfect opportunity. You can put it back in 1966, and because people love those hairdos, they love the groovy get-ups.
Do it like the Jane Austen films. Who's the producer in England that does those wonderful films?
Merchant Ivory?
There. They should be like Merchant Ivory. Because, there's a kind of social contract to Dark Shadows. There's a way that people are supposed to treat each other. It has a kind of, it's old-fashioned.
Exactly so.
And when Dan did the first remake of Dark Shadows with Joanna Going.
Right, the NBC, the 1991 series, yep.
See, it opened the night of the Gulf War. I mean...
Didn't really get a fair shake.
No one saw it.
Yeah. It was always being preempted.
And it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, it had wonderful outdoor scenes with horses, and it was gorgeous, and I thought she was perfect.
She was wonderful as Victoria.
And she had the gothic heroine air. Gorgeous.
Now, what about Lizette Anthony?
She was a witch.
She was a witch.
Very sexy.
Very pretty lady. Very pretty lady.
Very pretty, very sexy. But you don't care about those people. And that's the essential thing, is you cared about Barnabas. You really, you worried about him and you cared about him. So how do you do that when you're playing a monster that sucks people's blood?
And there was always gallons. I mean, it was a lot more violent, obviously, than what you all could do back on television in the 60s.
Oh, well, this was a soap, and so we had people who were Procter & Gamble watchers who were in the green room watching the rehearsals, and they would say, you can't have that much blood. We have two little tiny pinpricks in the neck. There were a little bit of red makeup in each one. That was the vampire bite. And look at what they do on, what is it?
Well, there was True Blood, obviously.
True Blood,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's the kind of horror that you recoil from. You don't relate to. You just go, ugh. And there's the kind that you're drawn into, where your imagination goes, what's that scratching noise on the window? Or
exactly.
something under my bed, What's that sound? And you get the hair stands up on the back of your arm, and that's what Dark Shadows was. The imagination of the audience was at play, And
it's not what you see. It's not what you see. It's what you don't see.
It's what you don't see. I've always compared it to a love scene which doesn't go beyond the first kiss.
Yes.
Or pornography.
Yeah.
Where you're watching it all and you're going, oh, God, there they go again. One you are drawn into, one you withdraw from, you recoil.
Yes.
And so I don't think that most of the vampire shows that they do, they don't draw you in. You go, oh, okay, so vampires are really good at making love, and they have blood all over the sheets. So what? It's not interesting.
Yeah, you don't need to see 20 quarts of blood in order to make the point. It's certainly, they didn't on Dark Shadows.
And these click into place teeth.
Yes.
I mean, the first time you're like, oh, that's cool. And then you go, oh, how do they do that? And you're not even thinking about the fact that you're going, oh, and then they do those funny things with their eyes. And
now, you had those teeth. Did you not? You had to, because I know a couple of actors had to glue fingernails.
On True Blood, they clicked into place, didn't they? They came, they come flying down into place. I don't know. Maybe it was.
Oh, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I know. Yes.
I mean, it's like special effects. You don't need a mirror ball when you have good acting.
But they sent you to the dentist. You and Jonathan, didn't you? You actually had to have the incisors.
We had teeth that we could slide into place. Yeah, you held it in your hand, and the camera cut away. Put it in your mouth. The camera came back, and you had your teeth.
Catherine Lee Scott talks about the fingernails having they actually they were too cheap to get her send her to the dentist, so she put eyelash glue on her real incisors, and then they coated them with Lee's press-on nails.
When they realized how popular the vampires were getting, we were all sent off. I had 2 pair. In case I lost one. Yeah, that was actually pretty fun.
So then we had, after Angelique's Descent, we had the Salem branch, which love, because I've always been obsessed with the Salem witch trials, and not so much the town, but that was wonderful. I love Wolf Moon Rising because, again, you did set it in the 20s, which is one of my favorite periods. I just could imagine the people walking around Collinwood singing all that jazz, and
I know, it's so great to imagine that family in the 20s.
Oh, and a missed opportunity on the original show. I thought, and I wrote this at the time, that I if only someone had the brains to say, we haven't done that yet. We've gone to the 18th century in 1897, but we haven't gone into the Prohibition period.
Of course they would have been rum runners, and of course they would have been breaking the law. And I read a lot about the 20s to try to get the feel of, what exactly to use. And it was, it's fascinating what research will do. I read somewhere about all the places they would hide the liquor, in the basement, and under the floorboards of the car, and they used to go out to the graveyard and open the coffins and put the whiskey in the coffins. And I went, oh, really? Out to the graveyard, open the coffin? And I thought, well, Barnabas slept for 200 years. He was sound asleep in the 20s. And just right away, it just falls into place. You get this wonderful idea where they open the coffin and there's your vampire. And that was just one little moment. But, it was fun reading about that period. And you try to do a lot of things in a novel. And one of the things you try to do is have some kind of awareness of the social truths. And, I just thought that the hypocrisy of the Salem judges and the hypocrisy of the people who, in the 20s, who had all the liquor they wanted and still sent people to jail for selling liquor,
It works.
Yeah, it was just, and I've always thought that the Collins family were cursed. And I thought they should have done something from the very beginning to bring the curse of misfortune upon them. So making them slave traders and making them, rum runners and making them associated with the Ku Klux Klan. I just think that makes sense.
It's of the 4 books, it's still my favorite. I love Wolf Moon Rising. It's
oh, really?
Yeah, I really. I love the new book and the predecessors, but Wolf Moon Rising is my favorite. I love the focus on Joan Bennett. I loved the fact that you tied in, and this is something that you do in all the books, and I noticed it in Heiress of Collinwood, where one character, and again, that you carry on the repertory style. I love that we have these new characters, and they're clearly the actors that would have played them on the show. If, and to have this one character who has an affinity for stacks of Hershey bars and Coca-Cola, and all of us hardcore fans know who that is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's great.
Fun. Yeah, that was fun.
Now, with Joan Bennett and Wolf Moon Ride, just before we get to Heiress of Collinwood, was she, she was a movie star. From the studio kids, the kids that used to hang out by the stage door, they all had wonderful things to say about her. You would think that she would have been a diva and, I'm from Hollywood. And did you ever get that impression from her?
She was a class act. She was superior in every way. She was not a soap opera actress. She was a movie star. And she carried herself with an elegance. She'd been through it all, She had a hard time because it's very hard to do. She couldn't stop. She couldn't cut. Sometimes I'd be doing scenes with her and she would literally be shaking because she was so nervous and so scared. Because the soap is hard to do. But she had she was just so elegant and wonderful voice, that voice just dripping, what would you say, East Coast sophistication and money. But her story was a wonderful one. Her father pushed her into the theater and didn't want her to do movies. And, she was never a snob in any way. Very kind lady.
That's great. It's great to know because she certainly gave off, I thought, a lovely maternal quality on the show. There was just something that exuded from her that she seemed like a very sincere lady. And again, imagining her, well, you go back and watching her movies like Woman in the Window and all of those great early films of hers. To imagine that young Liz Stoddard, I loved that. For me, just again as a fan, thinking, well, she had this wild, reckless life, and yet in the present day, she's always getting on Carolyn's case, and like, well, now you know where that comes from because she had been there and done that in her in her heyday.
Well, I wanted to find some reason for her to be so melancholy and to have lost the zest for life and to be so unhappy. So I just thought it would be interesting if, she had been deeply in love and had lost her love. And I don't know. She seemed motherly, but you never knew anything about her.
Well, they never did. I mean, they never did much with her. She had that initial storyline early on in the series, and once that was done, that was pretty much it. In terms of, the Paul Stoddard going missing and all of that falderall. But
I thought that I didn't want to do that. I could have, but I decided to go elsewhere, It's just...
But it was great. And I think we'd all be pretty melancholy if we lost David Selby. I speak for a lot of us, if...
Well, unrequited love is the love that everyone is so deeply drawn to. Triste on his soul, the couple with the sword between them. So to have a romance between someone who's lived for 200 years and someone who's just living, and the fact that it's impossible, I think it makes you. I think it pulls you in. I don't know. That's how I feel. I think it. I don't know. I just made it up. I don't know.
Well, and you want it to work, and in terms of what you're talking about, her being a human, and Quentin, being this.
He lives under a spell. Yeah.
Yeah. So it in a sense, it never can work.
But a lot of people didn't like it. So that's we take these chances, and in the same way with in this last book, you bring the real life story into the story. A lot of people don't like that. And so, I get bad reviews.
They have their own ideas. Again, the hardcore fans have their own ideas, and as I said earlier, they'll bemoan the fact that, again, Jonathan Frid and Grayson Hall couldn't star in the 2012 movie. I mean, and that's, I think you need to go lay on a couch if that's your sensibility. But that, again, I feel Dark Shadows is so malleable. And over the years, I mean, if you read some of the fan fiction and some of the ideas that fans themselves have come up with, people just like to hear themselves talk. But the way the story has gone, and now where we're at now with Heiress of Collinwood, and again, having you tie up such an important story that if Dan Curtis had done nothing at the end, it would have been great for them to have come back into the present day, at least to have tied up the story about Victoria Winters, because we're left to wonder whatever happened to Victoria Winters.
Alexandra Mulkey wanted to get off the show. That's what happened to her.
She was pregnant. She was several months pregnant at the time, correct?
Oh, I don't know.
I
was in the studio with her every day, and she didn't want to go into makeup. She didn't want to comb her hair. I mean, she did not want to be an actress.
She wanted out.
Yeah, she wanted out.
She wanted out.
A society girl, and acting wasn't all that much fun. And she didn't like her character. She thought her character was boring. She was a perfectly beautiful actress.
A very beautiful lady.
So natural, so at ease. I loved watching her act. But she didn't like it, She just... And I wanted to make Victoria more interesting than she had been on the show.
Well, what's interesting about Victoria is that in that first year, before Barnabas came onto the scene, she did have a little bit more of an edge to her. Not much, but she seemed to have... She wasn't afraid to stand up to the members of the Collins family, whether it was Roger Collins, played by Louis Edmonds, or Joan Bennett. But she did become more and more of a simpering... But she was the audience's eyes. I mean, the audience was seeing it all through her.
She was the eyes of the audience. So... she just was reactive rather than active. And that's not very much fun to play. So, she... But...
I did see an interview with her where she said they tried to coax her to come back after her son was born, and she said, "Oh, well, I'll only do it if you'll make me someone evil. If you'll make me a vampire or whatever." I don't, want to be goody-goody Victoria anymore. And I guess that didn't sit well. And the two actors, God bless them, the two actresses that they tried to cast, I mean, they just didn't work. She was so beloved by the audience. It's hard. I mean, that would have been like trying to replace Jonathan or trying to replace you after you had become so established.
Yeah, well, Alexandra Mulkey was royalty. She came from a royal family. She'd been to, finishing school. She was a cut above in her mannerisms and her vocalization and the way she carried herself. I mean, she was a society girl. She was very, very high class. And I think that gave... One of the things that I talk about in the book is that people tell Vicky... She grew up in an orphanage, but people tell her, you could have gone to finishing school because you have an air about you of sophistication and elegance.
And her upbringing, one of the things I loved what you did with the story is that her upbringing was positively Dickensian in terms of what the Hammond foundling home was like.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't get any inkling of that. I mean, we don't see it all that often in that first year of the show. We know Mrs. Hopewell, played by the late, great Elizabeth Wilson. But and then the fact that the school was actually owned by another character on Dark Shadows, it's a wonderful twist. It's a wonderful, but Vicky had such a, from your standpoint, this very horrific, very, as I said, I felt like a very Dickensian upbringing.
Well, when I was a little girl, I was sent to a boarding school for 4 years in Connecticut because my mother had to work. And all the things that are in the book actually happened to me. So that's what writers do, you know.
Well, it's right what you know.
Well, I mean, we actually had a woman who used a child as her crutch. She didn't use a cane, she used a child. And if she picked you, you had to walk in front of her with her claws in your shoulder. She was a cripple. She'd lean on you. She was a big, heavy lady. Terrifying. And if we didn't finish a meal, when we came back to the next meal, the food was still sitting there, and we didn't get to eat until we finished that food. And I really was made to stand in the bathroom all night long.
As Victoria was in the book, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we really had a merry-go-round seesaw that we were not permitted to push in a circle. And all those strange little details. I actually tried to run away, and I went out on the fire escape and fell. And there was a place in the closet that was boarded up that we were certain had jewels in it and a skeleton. So all of these things that I put in the book happened to me when I was a little girl.
You're still here, and but oh my God, that's incredible to me.
Yeah, I went to a boarding school. It was
so you're not just drawing.
It was really horrible.
Well, it's interesting because I was going to say to you, I mean, one of the things I love about the books, and the last two in particular, is I feel that they really do encompass all of the different genres of Dark Shadows. I mean, it has the original series there, but I do feel there's shades of the NBC remake and the feature films, which were very dark. They were not at all like the television series. And maybe a little bit of the Depp thing going on in there, but and the tongue in cheek, but not just that. I mean, you're drawing upon your own life experience, and it hits home. I mean, those scenes in the Foundling home are horrific.
Well, if you were to imagine a horrible orphanage, you would probably imagine cliches. But those details they come from the truth is weirder than fiction category.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And of course, the ending, the whole reveal that, plays off of the Klaus von Bülow story. I wanted to do that. I wanted to pull in all the elements. And
I didn't see it coming. I did not, when I realized that that's who Roger Davis is, Stefan, character.
I know.
It's a brilliant twist. It is a brilliant twist, and inspired. I was like, wow. She went there.
That's who she was. That's the twist, which I won't say, but...
Yes.
But anyhow, I mean, that's the fun of writing. I mean, you get it from all sources. You get it from the newspaper, you get it from your own life. I mean, we have a sailboat, and we sail it every weekend, and so I thought, I think I'm gonna put them on a sailboat. I mean, why not?
And Vicky is once again the victim. I mean, it's and she's strong. And again,
but she's not. She gets stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yes.
I love this moment when she's on the horse, and she says, "People do this. fact that she built on Jane Eyre.
Very, very much so, yes.
That she rediscovered Jane Eyre, and she discovered that Jane was actually quite plucky and stood up for herself. And she was inspired by that. And I thought by the end, Vicky was getting very strong. And she'd outgrown the Vicky that we saw on TV. So.
There's a passage in the book I absolutely love, and it really I want to say it gave me a sweet chuckle when I read it. It goes to the effect of, in terms of describing Victoria, much of the time, however, she seems outwardly reserved, often repeating what others say, and sometimes she seems confused or even bewildered. I don't know how many times I've heard her say, "I don't understand," when confronted with a dilemma or a peculiar situation, and God knows there are so many at Collinwood.
Well, I thought she was fun, and I wrote in first person for the first time, so that was an interesting departure. So
it's just a wonderful, the new book is, again, as I said, I think you capture all of the different elements, the variations of Dark Shadows. All of the ingredients are there, including a little tongue-in-cheek.
Well, thank you so much.
It's wonderful. So I hope everybody reads Heiress of Collinwood, and you should definitely read Angelique's Descent and Dark Shadows, the Salem Branch, and Wolf Moon Rising, because you're keeping the and dare I say it, but you, whether you like it or not, you have left yourself open here for a fifth book, because
I know.
And I hope you'll consider that, because there's a whole other story about, well, I won't get into it. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the way the book ends, it's like, oh my God, I want to know what happened. Well, it's like when I watched the show and I would get my MPI home videotapes, being a second generation fan, and you'd get to that fourth tape, and they'd leave you on some cliffhanger, like David being trapped in a coffin and Barnabas about to find him, and you'd go, no, I want to know what happens next. And that's what that's what you've done with Heiress of Collinwood. We all want to know what happens next. So please think about that, because
well, I have no idea. So if someone gives me a good idea, because I have no idea what happens next.
And any special message for your Dark Shadows fans, in closing, any special message you want to send out? And there's so many of them. I mean, again, I'm second generation. I discovered the show when it was on cable for briefly, and then VHS tape, and then of course now the DVDs and decades, and it's amazing how the show continues to touch and delight people. It must make you feel proud that you're a part of that.
It does, and I'm so. I mean, I dedicated the third book to the fans, and I hate to even call them fans, because it's an inadequate word. It's, they're friendships, and the people who love the show have given me have given so much to my life, and I'm very grateful to them. I'm grateful for their loyalty, and happy that they were the ones that chose to make Dark Shadows the show they followed. I mean, the new ones and the ones that have been there forever.
Yeah, little ones. It's amazing to me when I tell people when I tell people that I know Angelique, and
I know you were just a little baby when it was on the air.
It was just I was a little. Well, my godmother ran home from school to watch the original show, and then she introduced me to it. But you mentioned Dark Shadows, or my other half has a disability, and when he was told he had to walk with a cane, we thought, this is it, and he has a Barnabas cane.
Of course he does.
And people see the cane and are like, oh my God, do you know what that's from? And yes, we know what it's from. So it is amazing.
You too on the cruise.
Aren't they doing another one? Aren't they doing another cruise? Is that in the works?
They're going to do a Boston cruise, yeah, and they're going to go to Salem.
Well, then we'll have to...
I don't know. I don't know whether it will... I mean, it's supposed to happen, but it's a year and a half away, and I don't know.
Well, certainly... Well, I'll tell you what. Here's hoping to a Dark Shadows cruise. Here's certainly hoping to a fifth Dark Shadows novel by Lara Parker, because I know I speak for a lot of us when I say we want one. And Lara, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about Dark Shadows, Heiress of Collinwood.
It was a pleasure, as always, to talk to you again, Peter.
Thanks, Lara. And for all of you listening at the Huffington Post, and for Mac and Chat, tune in and listen to us again soon. Thanks, Lara. And for all of you listening at the Huffington Post, and for Mac and Chat, tune in and listen to us again soon.